Hey guys, welcome back to Digital Artcast, another episode hot off the heels of the last one again, and we are adding new and fantastic guests. I hope you have enjoyed everyone I've had on up until this point. I've worked really hard and tirelessly, as always, outside of a normal job, to try and find guests that I feel will be appealing to you guys and hopefully help you on your artistic journey. So wherever you are in the world, I hope you're still safe and creative as always. Again, another switch this time, going away from not particularly going away from artists, but towards something in a different profession. We obviously have a legacy here in Scotland of making games. This goes back to, well before people were really paying attention to video games and the industry. A lot of people, it's always funny, and we'll probably talk about this with our guest, never really understand that Grand Theft Auto was a game that was made in Scotland, famously, specifically in Dundee back in the day of DMA Designs. The first game was Lemmings. People don't know that, but the thing of the education base here has always been spectacular, and I think the curriculum has always been something that's inspired people to come here and learn and get an education in this country. So today we are speaking to an educator specifically, someone who is now moulding the minds of the next generation of artists and developers that are going to come out and work within this sector. So I thought it would be interesting to get him on and talk about not specifically what he's doing, but what he's going to be doing in the future and how he's going to prevent people from probably either losing their jobs to AI or adjusting to it so they will have something to put in their portfolio later down the line. So today we are going to talk to Mr. Ryan Locke. Hi Ryan, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Give you a little wave there, just because I love doing it. I love waving.
Yeah, you can see our pretty faces on YouTube. It's always good, the video versions. It's just like, hey everybody. So yeah. So we met, I'm trying to think how many years that would have been now, but 6 years ago, 2018, industry workshops. Now, typically, I think we were just kind of talking to each other off the cuff, watching whatever talk we were at the time, but most people down there are industry people, so they're artists trying to break in, or they're artists that are already in who are coming back to maybe sharpen their skills. But I was surprised to learn that you were from Scotland, in a sense that you were working up there, and you were working in Dundee, specifically Abertay, which is a university that is obviously very famous for a lot of its alumni anyway, being the original founding cast of what is now known as Rockstar North, or Rockstar Games also. So yeah, when we met, I think you were lecturing at some level, but now you have this fancy title, which is the head of Centre for Excellence in Computer Games Education. Okay, so talk a wee bit about what you do, Ryan, right now. What is your job day to day?
Certainly, yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, so obviously the last time we met, I was a lecturer, and I was like, when you said that, I was wondering, was I lecturing actively everyone around me, because I've got a habit of doing that. It's like being sort of like, it was coming towards like that sort of 10th anniversary of being a lecturer, and I think there was maybe one other promotion along the way to being sort of head of curriculum, or was it? What was it? Head of digital learning. That was it. Because I had kind of an obsession with curriculum and course design. I love that stuff. A real stickler for it. And then kind of got really stuck into just how we do online delivery. This was before COVID, by the way. So it was before it was cool. But yeah, it was just and I was kind of just chipping away at stuff there. And then there was an opportunity to apply for this role, which, as you say, kind of comes with this really lofty title. But that's based on the fact that we are the designated Centre for Excellence in Scotland for Games Education. And ultimately, they wanted to put somebody in charge of that in a non-managerial way, which is really useful, by the way. Don't want to line manage anyone, not yet anyway. So I'm kind of like a sort of free agent in lots of ways to kind of turn that role into something that we find useful. And so ultimately, that was probably back in November or the end of November. And pretty much my mission since then is trying to figure out what the role is and apply it in ways that I think are useful, not just to the university. I kind of worry less about university and more about students. Right. I still keep my teaching responsibilities, and I love being student facing anyway, or else I'm not aware of what's going well, what's not going well, and what could be better. And then of course, I tend to have a good rapport with students as well, so I don't want to lose that. So I always see that as kind of like one foot in the university and 1 foot outside of it. And so I work in what's called the School of Design and Informatics, and the division is the Division of Games and Arts. But that is all underneath the Head of Centre for Excellence in Games Education. And kind of the other role, one leg outside the building, is kind of more industry facing. And I guess
Right.
there's a little bit of politics in there as well,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get around the important policymakers and stakeholders that control the money, control the laws, control what who decides what.
Yeah.
Not because I'm particularly good at it. I'm awful at all that stuff. I'm kind of like a fish out of water when it comes to these sort of places. But I do need to sort of shake hands with these people and get to know them a bit and just tell them what some of the stressors are, what
Mm-hmm.
some of the issues are, and also how they can help.
Right.
And the same with industry as well. I see my role as kind of meeting, I think, I would say reinforcing more than anything our industry ties. We've always had good industry ties, but I think in the climate we're in, good's not good enough,
Yeah.
So I think it's just, I want it to be really good and deeper industry ties, really kind of bridging the gap.
Mm-hmm.
We've had staff that have, either retired, they were there at the beginning, they're all gone now.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this kind of like younger kind of sort of body of staff that I think are really hungry, and
Yep.
it's now time to sort of step up to the plate and kind of be one of the people that can get out there and meet these, go to their studios, meet the CEOs, meet the owners, meet the people that really want to make a difference, and kind of now and again let them tell us, what they need.
Mm-hmm.
But also kind of also make them aware of some of the the processes and pitfalls of higher education and all of its weird procedures.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of these things that like I think is, people have always given me this line that you'd be a great teacher, you'd be a great lecturer, and it's always these things I've wanted to do at one point in my life, but
Mhm.
I think I always felt disconnected from the education system in Scotland specifically because I felt like when I was at university, and this was back obviously in 2018, 2017, um, the lecturers done their best, but they're always fighting against the brick wall that was money. And,
Yeah.
I think the year I was there, for instance, like, I reestablished connections with Access. I got that kind of mentorship thing up and running again that had been kind of dormant for a couple of years. And the lecturers also brought in a fresh face, Peter, at the time, because Pete Santana, because so he'd been out working at I think one of the studios, I forget the name of it. It was in Glasgow. They done a Need for Speed game basically, and
Mhm.
when the studio folded, basically he came back in because he was a former student, so he got in as a kind of class aide, and then eventually they hired him as a lecturer,
Nice.
which I think was a great move because obviously Pete had at least better knowledge than most, because I think Mark and John, who'd run the course in Paisley, John had came from computer science and Mark came from kind of TV and film. So there wasn't like a background in games or animation in the sense that like they'd been out and worked. They'd really just done their whole thesis side of it. So I felt like, why would I go back in the education system? Because I couldn't really make any big changes that would help the students specifically. But then I think I've seen the stuff you've done the last couple of years in Dundee, specifically in Abertay, especially like we were just talking about before we started recording, the computer lab you have now, where you have how many 27-inch Cintiqs? There's a few of them in there, right?
Yeah, we just we say we're
Mm-hmm.
opening a new Cintiq lab.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of hope to have that actually ready for this semester, but it turned out
Right.
to be actually just a bit too early. You haven't figured out certain things, and so luckily I think it'll be up and running for the summer hopefully. So any of our master's students will get in there and get using it. But it's
Fantastic.
a 20-seater lab, but given the student numbers we have, I'm thinking I need 2 or 3 more of those.
Yeah. No, of course, yeah. And I mean, let's not be coy here. Like a
Yeah.
27-inch Cintiq is, I mean, depending on the model, but you're talking roughly about $2,000 a
Oh,
monitor.
do you want to know what was really annoying?
Mm,
We had personally literally punched the what was it? Because they did some deal. It was
right.
lovely.
Right.
You buy the Cintiq and you got the stand for free, and I was like
Which is
brilliant.
nice.
And like my sort of my I don't know what it is, but like my sort of gypsy Irish roots are really kicking in here, and I'm like, get them while they're cheap. Let's go. And we'll ask for forgiveness rather than permission because like
Yeah.
nothing was getting done. So
Yeah.
all credit goes to my boss, Dana Galloway, but
Mm-hmm.
he did it, and then of course all that started a bunch of actions. But I think it was like less than 3 months later they announced the new models at the same price, and I was like, oh, that's brilliant.
Ah.
But I prefer the old models.
Yeah.
So
I mean, see, to be fair, I think any kid or student would know really, it would be lost on them how lucky they are to have something like that. Because
mhm,
I think at the time, had 3 or 4 of them, and we had to share that through a class of 30. So
yeah,
it's like the people who really use them were the people who were really good at what they've done, or they're specifically doing character stuff, or they're specifically doing illustration. So if people weren't really doing that, you didn't get to use them. But like, it's such an experience even just to use one, like just to
oh
try
yeah,
it
yeah,
out, because there's such a joy to. I mean, I have the 24 HD next to me, but I've always wanted the 27-inch because I like a huge canvas. I like having that big real estate space with the monitor. especially the touch version, because I know some people do the thing where they can put some touch controls down the side. You can essentially draw while touching, like undo,
What's
next brush. Yeah,
so yeah, I think you mentioned an iPad earlier, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I I love my iPad. Like it's the first Apple product I ever bought that I was like that's brilliant. That is perfect. I
yep.
love it. But again, I put my hand. It's a big shovel of a hand. So if I
Oh
put
yeah,
that on it, that's half the screen gone. So
yeah,
when I
yeah.
work
No,
at home, the bigger the tablet, the better. But
I know. I'll just even off a cuff, but like I watched the Apple event, and I was absolutely everybody I knew from like every studio in the world was like, please give me a 20 odd inch or an 18-inch version of that iPad. That's I mean, I'll buy 2 of them, 3 of them.
Mhm.
Just please make it bigger than 13 inches. And they were like, it's slimmer and got less battery, and folk were like, oh,
Yeah,
like such a
no one
missed
asked for that.
opportunity. Oh my god! Like who is asking
Yeah,
for
yeah,
that? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I don't know if they're like people have had this idea because of this WWDC things coming up. If they're going to announce some kind of like mobile workstation where you can light the Wacom, you can have a bigger screen down and then draw and connect it to a Mac, but then take it off and maybe go with it somewhere. I don't know, but like yeah, I think knowing how people want to use the iPad, like there's so many concept designers I know who like don't even touch Photoshop anymore, and now I think it was only like 2 weeks ago. So Ian McHugh, who we know famously worked at Rockstar, he literally tweeted to Savage's CEO, Procreate coming to desktop, and he was like, "We're working on it." So like, if they can get Procreate in desktop,
Yeah.
Adobe has had its day. Like, I don't know how that's going to cling to anything left, especially now that Canva have bought Affinity. So it's like, yeah, Procreate just that would be the absolute dream on desktop. So yeah,
Competition's always good in the market, right? And I think
yeah,
I hope if Procreate comes to PC,
hmm.
or Mac, that it does really, really well, and it gives Adobe a lot to think about. But I just don't think messages get through sometimes. But
Nah,
and I've grown up in Photoshop, much like a lot of people. It's hard letting go of something you've learned a lot of skills in.
yep.
But if I can move past director, I can move past anything. So
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I mean it's the same with like I mean I think literally 20 was it 2015 or 2016 I joined UWS, like they had just as I started the course moved from Lightwave to Maya. Like that was the jump they had made then. But like even now in Maya, like I'm so quick at it, I don't really want to learn Blender, but I don't really need to because I'm not a 3D production
yeah,
artist, I'm more 2D. But like
yeah.
but
That's the
like yeah,
snag I'm caught on. Actually, I'm like
yeah,
I'm hitting 40, right?
right.
I've
Same.
used Maya for a long time,
Yep.
and I actually really love Maya. I
Yep.
understand all the frustrations, and I was saying to students on a Discord server, there's this like it's treat Maya like an ancient evil deity that we've summoned that does our
Yeah.
bidding, but now and again flips out.
Yeah,
But
no. I mean
it
like
all makes sense.
the last couple of years have been great also because I think because Blender has really been lighting a fire under
Hmm.
Autodesk's ass. Like even the fact that now this year we have the smart extrude and a lot of the live either bevel or boolean tools, but at least they're trying to take up a bit of a thing of like we need to be a bit more competitive than they have the
Hmm.
indie license. So for $30 a month you can get Maya and you can use it. But like a lot of that back in the day when I started, it was like pro license or nothing or student. You can't. There's no in between. There's no
Hmm.
extra kind of features. There's no plugins. But like yeah, the industry it seems has just way evolved in the last couple of years. Even since I was at uni, like it just everything is different. The way production works in studios is different. The way they hire. Um, what is it a thing that you really do within like what you're doing with the curriculum that you are almost you can't guarantee obviously, but making sure people leave their fourth year with at least the right tools to walk into a job.
So I think there's a lot of topics there, but I think the most important one is usually it's classic hard skills and soft skills, and I know most people don't really like dividing things so explicitly into those camps, but
Hmm.
the big thing for me is that you've got to prove to a employer that you're capable of what you say you're capable of, and that's obviously going to be portfolio, and everything we do is portfolio based. I don't think get a single exam on computer arts that isn't a computer arts module, which is,
Hmm.
I always talk from a computer arts perspective. We have other degrees like, game design production, games technology. But the one, my experience will always come from computer arts side of things, which is a generalist digital art degree with streams in game art. And then
Hmm.
there's stuff in animation and stuff in some UI, UX and graphic design. Um, But we built those specialisms in after, like it was a sort of good, hard internal look at what we were doing and how we were doing it. And of course, it all launched just as COVID kicked off. So that was like whoa, what's going on here? An interesting time to do anything. But the big thing for me is like, it's you, like, what's an interview, right? It's where a company wants to know, like, can you do what we're asking you to, or do you have the skills and the capabilities to fit into our team? And then I guess the biggest one after that is, do we want to work with you? So the big thing for me is getting students, and I still love that, especially second and third year in particular, we've got two massive group projects, particularly in third year, which is our professional project module, which, looking back now, is coming towards 15 years old. But to this day, is kind of our sort of flagship module, where we do put students in teams that work for clients, and then that groups of artists, programmers, producers, audio people, designers, coming together to work on something that is, for some people, maybe the first major client-facing brief that they've worked on. Because getting everybody into internships is just impossible. There's just not enough internships out there to begin with.
No.
So we needed a way to interface with obviously games industry and beyond games industry. NHS were a client for a long time, but and that's all part of, like, if I think of my colleague Dr. Andrew Reid, who is works very seriously in these games for change sort of briefs, and is launching a new module next year, which is all about that. People who want to make games and applications that help people or change things,
right?
But ultimately, most people come to university because they want to work in cool games, right? They want to learn how to at least work on them. And so I think for me, it's you've got to have a collection of portfolio work. If you leave with 2 or 3 pieces to say, I am exactly who I say I am, I can do this, I can do it well, and also I'm actually easy to talk to. I can talk to you. I've presented this work before. I've written about it. I know how to talk about it. And more than anything, I'm not saying that we can give you a personality, but hopefully you've been through the fire enough. You're absolutely, you know what you're talking about, and you know how to talk about it. But of course, depending on where you're starting from, that can be more difficult, or, for some people, it can be very easy. And then, of course, an entire gradient in between. But the idea is that you're trying to get people you're trying to pull them in different directions ultimately for growth, right? That's what students are there to do. And I just, as long as I hate the word training, right? Universities should never be training facilities. They are there to educate and for people to grow their minds, because ultimately at the center of this, creativity and your intellectual capacity for these things has to matter. As much as your ability to take instruction and work towards a brief, problem solve, and of course work with other people, get on with other people, all that stuff, all the gooey stuff that I love.
Yeah, and it's even about, good old soft skills. Like you said, so you and I are the same age, basically. So it's a thing where we grew up in a time where, again, pre-internet and things where, in this country, you had to be able to talk to people and stand in front of them and say things. But the one thing we had in common at the time was we were meeting at an event, and, God love them. I literally took all the money I had from that first term and I went down to London to industry workshops, and I stood in front of John and Jill and I was like, hey, what's happening? What you guys all about? And as soon as John started talking, I was like, oh, you're Scottish. I was like, oh, I'm studying in Paisley actually. And John was like, oh, really interesting. And Jill was like, should come up to the studio sometime and have a wee tour. I was like, fantastic. Like, like literally just standing in front of them was something that got me an internship. Obviously my personality was something that they drew to, and had obviously thought about, well, he's a nice enough guy, let's get him in for a wee look. Looking back now, my time at Access was great. It was difficult because I think they hadn't run the program for a long while, so they didn't know where to put me. Basically, they were running, about making me do kind of like admin tasks and stuff. I got to do a bit of art stuff, a bit here and there, but it was mostly just coming in the studio and experiencing it. But the good thing about doing that, at least, was, getting to see behind the curtain, of how the sausage is made. It's like, it was just such night and day from being in the classroom with those other kids and then sitting next to those professionals, like working on League of Legends, working on Destiny 2, working on that Happy TV series, like all that stuff, where I would sit and watch, frame by frame, them changing stuff and, adding things in, and, oh, this is how we do VFX. Like, it was only a couple of months, but it just woke me up to, like, I used to go, even like the first week when I done 2 days, it was the Tuesday and Wednesday or whatever, and I went back on Thursday for my lecture, and I was sitting in that room like, what am I doing? like
Yeah.
my portfolio is absolute garbage, man. I really need to start working on this,
Yeah.
because you were sitting next to these people who'd been working on all these big League of Legends things, and you were like, I'm nowhere absolutely near like what I need to be. Like I felt so like in panic mode, you know.
But
So
what
yeah,
what a great experience to have, and like how important that is. And I think that um I think things that motivate or jumpstart you are just as important as things that grow you. And like I've always believed in slow growth anyway.
yeah,
Learn surely and safely, but of course, always take a growth spurt where you can. But I think if you can get something that kind of lights a fire under your arse, then brilliant,
yeah. Oh God,
And I think like I love when situations like that happen, when you see that, and it happens with a lot of students when just something sparkles. It's different,
yeah,
They've worked on a couple of projects because they kind of do, like I said, we're a generalist degree, so they will do a module or two that they just don't like.
yeah,
That's totally fine. And you can see it in their face, deadpan. They're like, that was horrible, but I got through it. And then you get that one module, that one thing that they
mhm,
really liked, and just this, they come to life and they want to talk about it. They want to share things.
yeah,
And I know there's a lot of scary realities out there, and there's even some scary things in unis, like, presentations. Who wants to do them? No one.
yeah,
But if you love what you're talking about, if you care about it and you're excited about it, then it's more like, it's not presenting, it's me trying to shut you up. And
yeah.
that's the flip, getting people into that situation is usually where it's at.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult as well. I think because people would say, "Oh, what was it like at Access?" And I'm like, "Fucking incredible!" And like, "Oh, what are they working on?" I'm like, "Well, I can't talk about it, but like, it's amazing stuff. Like, it's really cool."
Yeah.
And then, I think it's just the idea that sometimes people for so long in this country, especially through like places like university and colleges, um, although I say that colleges sometimes I think feel have a bit of an edge, because we always talked about and laughed when we were at college, and the lectures we had would say, when we were at uni, our contact hours where our staff were like 2 to 3 hours a week. You were lucky if you saw them.
Mhm.
Whereas in college, we were literally sitting sometimes 8 hours a day in a class, like with people, getting taught. But like, yeah, like the whole idea of like, being prepared to leave the womb, and go into the world and face that on, head on. It's difficult because it's like, for me, the industry has always been a double edged sword, and the fact that I understand how they strive for excellence in everything they do, and they want to make the best game and the best product possible. But at this point in time, I think, especially because of stuff like capitalism, it's really just like taking kids in through a grinder and chewing them up and spitting them at the other side, like, either through crunch or mismanagement or studios that are just not ready for people. Or again, like the bar is so high in some studios, like you've never got an idea of ever getting a junior job. Like, it's so difficult to really, especially now with the amount of applicants and all the layoffs. So it's I think, because it's such a fresh industry in the sense that, like, it's only been really going since the 80s. There's so much we've still not figured out that needs to be figured out, especially in education. But then you look to the future again. This is something like you can do where you're not just looking at the now. You're looking at where is the industry going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So what do the roadmaps kind of look like? Like, what questions are you asking of your team to make sure that like you're covering all bases? Like, obviously with stuff like AR, VR, AI, like all that stuff. Is that things that you're talking about constantly with the curriculum?
Yeah, yeah. If it's not, if we're not having a debate or a discussion about it, usually just a panicked, like,
Yeah.
hurried amount of words, and like all the usual strife, like
What are we going to do?
yeah,
Yeah.
why is this happening? Why now? Why did no, we don't deserve this?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I think like everybody's reaction, it is like it's hard to believe that it's just coming. Not even 3 years, and this tidal wave of
Mm-hmm.
a new thing of what AI art is, and what
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be, what it's going to do, and all the anxieties around that. Never mind the context of, like, this was a world just emerging from a pandemic, and
Mm-hmm.
all the emergencies that came with that, and the
Mm-hmm.
anxieties and the dread, and then of course, what that did, I think, in terms of culture wars and conspiracies on the internet and social media, and then in the backdrop of a global, I guess, cost of living crisis.
Yep.
Like, it was, when you add it all up, right, you're just like, I look at students and I'm like, this is rough. This
Yeah.
is so rough. You're getting it worse than anyone I can remember in my time.
Yep.
And I cannot hide you from that, and I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk
Mm-hmm.
about what matters.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in terms of staff, like, I think, really incredible collection of people.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the brightest minds. I'm so lucky to work with them, and and they take different positions on different things. And like some of us are, like myself and a couple of colleagues, are very not necessarily anti AI, but I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
I don't want to know. I'm like, to me, my creativity or my students' creativity and their ability to problem solve and to imagine and to dream of solutions,
Yep.
and think them on the fly is too important. Well, like on the other side, we may have we've got, I think, definitely one or two staff members who are like, well, this is a new and emerging technology. We need to look at it and understand it. It's a research thing, right? And
it's balance. Everything's about balance, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I just like it's a weird and scary time, but also it's like these things happen every so often. You're going to have generational shifts, and how you handle and manage that is going to be important. And so right now we had just finished a curriculum shift there. It's taken some time to make it happen, and there's going to be a couple of pie crust trimmings to come around. But eventually we're like, well, we just did this, but I think we're going to have to enter a stage of, especially in education. Higher education works in sort of 5-year kind of curriculum review chunks, right? And I'm like, that's just not good enough. We're going to have to be in a situation where we're much more reactive and reflexive to shifts in industry, but also we also need to be careful here, because if you react too quickly and make these massive sweeping changes constantly, your staff never have a time to, never mind sit down, but how do you amend your teaching materials year on year to match that? It's actually impossible. And we always think, I think we mentioned it earlier before we started, is that you must always identify what is core and fundamental for people to know. Even if it's not interesting, even if there's like a generational shift where like, oh, that's boring, we don't want to do it. And you're like, nope, you have to, it's good for you. And make sure that happens in a way that's sustainable, but also interests people and lights their imaginations on fire, makes them want to create, but also not hiding anybody from the reality of the world as it is, I think there's that way danger lies, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of valid points there, and I think one of the things I've noticed, especially to do with AI, because I've watched so much content on it now. I've been involved in many groups that have actually lobbied for change. A lot of the guys like Carl Ortiz and Steve Zapata that were talking at the Congress, I was part of that initial movement on Facebook with those guys and helping raise some funds for it, especially on the EU side as well. So a couple of things. So the EU regulations just passed, so that like AI now has to be warranted in the sense that people have to provide training data to say where it comes from, what they're training the data sets on. If it's illegal or it's copyright infringement, they can't use it in certain systems.
Excellent.
It also covers things now like social credit systems that people thought was going to get used for, so that's now banned also as well. And copyright infringement is included within all the artistic works. So yeah, people can't use it to produce fan arts or derivations and stuff like that. So now that law is in place, it sets a huge precedent across here, which is great. It's what we've been fighting for. We're all really happy about it. But then on top of that, China just ruled in favor of the Ultraman case. So the Chinese courts ruled that the Ultraman case where they were making the fan art stuff, like that was copyright infringement. So now they've claimed that as well. It's now illegal in China. So we really just need to get America on board, and then like everything will flow in. If the New York Times win their case, that would be great as well. Also like the artistic stuff. Like I know, speaking to Jason Shire, who is obviously at Paramount Pictures working on Transformers, but he had said that like he probably feels that the studios are going to go on strike again this summer, the Animation Guild specifically, because they are hiring AI people at the moment, and a lot of art directors are not happy about that. So they're going to march on that, which will be backed, of course, with a lot of other unions and stuff like that. So I feel like it's shifting in our favor. Also, the fact that a lot of the guys who are at the top of AI, like Stability, Stability is obviously now closed and is defunct, so that's great. A win for us. But you see the people who I've watched a really good documentary. I'll show you, and it was all this Gary Vee thing and the cryptocurrency thing, like at the time. But it was all how the people who were in NFTs and founded a lot of that shit then left and went to crypto, and then when that fell, they then left and went to AI. So a lot of it, I feel, it's almost like a snake oil thing, Ryan. Like, have you seen that thing that people were advertising, the rabbit, the R1? It was a little, So you probably know what I'm going to talk about here, where basically people were like, Marcus Brownlee like bought it, and he was like, this thing's shit. Like, it doesn't do anything it was supposed to do. Your phone can do it better. Why are people buying this? AI has this promise of infinite possibilities, but it really is not meeting the standard people thought it was going to. And especially with art, people had this thing about like, it's going to replace artists. Every art director, every senior I've spoken to, every creative guy at the highest peak of every company I've talked to on this podcast or outside of this podcast has told me one thing. There is no way that is replacing a human artist. Not now, probably not even in 5 years, because it just can't do the things that it's supposed to do. Like Feng Zhu, I don't know if you've seen it, but he done a really long video on FCD about, it was 2 hours long, about why AI won't replace you. And it's because it can make the pretty picture, but it can't design, it can't problem solve, it can't do orthographics, it can't design interior spaces. Like the harder stuff that needs to be done by humans is stuff
Technical.
that just can't even come close to.
So
So yeah.
the whole shebang for me, from the very beginning, was it just highlighted just how misunderstood art rules are more than
Yeah.
anything. And while there was panic, my panic too was real, but it was because it was knowing it would be misunderstood. And
Yeah.
of course, you speak to any creative, an art director, someone who's worked on art before, worked with artists, they know that that could never replace a human artist because it just makes pictures. That's not enough. That's not what artists are solely responsible for, and how they fit in and network and work within teams and production lines, right? You know all this.
Yeah.
But the big thing for me was obviously it was people who didn't know that, and who were also, they were leaders, or they held the money, and they were like, well, I always kind of go for the typical kind of tech bro. He was like, like, hey, do you hear AI is going to just eliminate artists? So I just fired all mine. And then
Yeah.
3 months later, they're hiring them all back again because it's like,
Yep.
yeah, it turned out that it
There's
didn't
too
do it
much
when I
money. I had
wanted
to
it
spend more money
to.
to fix stuff. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And it was, and obviously like every new technology, it's the initial gold rush. But a gold rush turned into a cold rush, and I think that's always what happens. You see this time and time again, and AI will not deliver on the promises of that hyper-inflated vision that people had for it. And at the same time, it's an interesting new technology. Again, I've no love or desire for it. Like, there's probably going to be parts of AI that will be so subtle and woven into the software and tools that
Yeah.
we use for all the future. But human ingenuity isn't replaceable,
Yeah.
not the way people think it is.
Yeah.
I can't talk to AI, and AI isn't going to go to GDC and tell me how it art directed a game.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that, because if it does one day, I'm screwed. But there is something about that. It's it's art is us, and machines can never be us.
It is the human experience transitioned into a moving picture. That's exactly what art is. I spoke to Jason again, and only because I've spoken to him recently, but like he is again, Jason's one of the biggest people I've interviewed next to maybe Ian. And like Jason had talked about how what he feels is missing from AI is the soul. There is no soul to that work. There's nothing that you feel as a lived experience. When you see Jason's early paintings before he got hired for Blue Eyed Samurai, and you saw what he was, making those worlds, like you could feel like you were standing in the field with the main character. You felt like you could see it in the distance and see the places he was describing with his painting. Like it was very painterly, it was very expressive, something he'd been building his whole life, and you could see that passion in what he was painting. I have this thing now where it's like an eye, and people always quote me on it. I think it's incredible, like superpower to have. But I can look at a piece of artwork and I can be like, "That's Akmal Doria, that's Steven Zapata, that's XYZ artist." Um, there are living personalities in pieces of work like that. You can tell people's brushstrokes just by looking at what they're making, and yeah, I just don't feel like AI is ever going to cross that boundary of
No.
having a good thing. You're talking about machines having souls, and that's a whole other conversation. I mean, so like, yeah, I don't think, yeah,
We'll
yeah,
write a sci-fi novel together. But
yeah, 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 probably.
what you said there is just so important to me.
Mhm.
Art and skill as a result of a human life,
Yes.
and the desire and the urge to follow that path, to
Mhm.
me, is what makes these products that we all love. Like,
Yeah,
it's all poured into it.
yeah,
And with the risk of sounding like, a dismissible gooey argument with, drenched in emotion,
yeah,
that's exactly what it is. That's our
yeah,
products.
yeah.
But it highlights for me something that I do think is so sad in all of this, which was the amount of people so willingly happy and uncaring about who it stole from.
Mhm.
When AI steals from someone like Ian McHugh, it's
Mhm.
stolen decades of knowledge.
Yep.
Decades. He's a library. He's a human library. And that's every artist it's stole and borrowed from, and and to see people who just didn't care, or even more importantly, in some cases, encouraged it. Actually, they did it because it upset artists. You're like, okay, cool. And then you see an industry which is kind of like, in disarray for, completely different reasons. But I do think this plays part of it, which is there is a sense of a threat of toxicity through through the society that is it's touching and burning everything.
Yeah, it's difficult, man. I mean, there's a really good podcaster I listen to called Blind Boy. He's an Irish podcaster from Limerick. But have you ever heard of Blind Boy? He's got a bag on his head. He writes novels and stuff like that.
I haven't, but I'll check that out.
I'll need to send it to him. He's brilliant. But what he talked about, because he's autistic, and he talks about how it affects his writing, how his lived experience of being autistic his whole life has informed a lot of the stories he's wrote down. Like I'm saying, lived experience into art, the same with writing songs, same with painting pictures. But he talked about the thing that he hated about AI, which was when COVID happened and the pandemic happened and people were forced to stay in their homes. What did they turn to in their time of need? Movies, books, music. Every single one of them written, produced, made by an artist. And, when people are at their whole lowest point, they turn to something creative to refill that energy back in them, because you can't get it from the outside world. So you find it in worlds that are not outside, but within your head. And Ethan Hawke done a really good TED talk about it one time. And Ethan talked about how, is human creativity needed? Is it something that we should strive to keep in our world? And he's like, well, most people don't read poetry, Ginsberg poetry or Zalm's poetry or any kind of poetry in general. But then, your dog dies, your dad dies, you lose a loved one, you break up with someone, you fall in love. And then you're thinking, you're falling through this field of has anybody ever felt this horrible? Oh my God, how do they express it? And then human creativity isn't just a need, it's a necessity. It's nourishment. It's nourishment for your soul. And that's what people lose in the sense of bringing a machine between us and them, is that you lose that sense of yearning to be connected to someone through their work. And I think you're never going to find that in a machine prompt or a line of text. And people who can write books in AI, but they're never going to be as heartfelt as reading something like how Tolkien poured his works for years into something like Lord of the Rings. So yeah, it's vastly needed to keep these kids alive and keep them influential, that you don't need to turn to AI.
And that's the danger. Me and you're going to sit and agree all day on this. It's just it's an important topic for all sorts of reasons. But I do think I love them. It's the philosophical meta level stuff that I find really important. And when it comes to the technical stuff, that's where I'm like, I don't know how it works, and I don't care. But it's I won't shy away. I work in a university where AI is it's one of the major themes for a lot of our technology people. Obviously, because AI is part of games, has been there forever, but not generative AI. I think there's maybe,
which is a separate thing when you talk about it, and I think making that distinguishment is very important for students. That AI within games is a thing that obviously helps us make things as it does and makes some things come alive. But the Gen AI stuff is the dangerous stuff we want to
precisely
avoid.
And it's just kind of getting a decent perspective on it and stuff. And I think there was maybe one or two staff along the way who experimented. I put my hands up when AI first landed, like everybody else. I put prompts in and come up with things.
Everybody did. Yeah,
everybody did. But it was just there seemed to be a bit of a witch hunt mood at some point for it. And I was like, oh my God, this person used AI, burn them. And I'm like, well, calm down.
You've got to take the rough with the smooth. I think the thing I've found that's helped me as a game of my ADHD brain is that ChatGPT is good at making schedules. If I'm saying I'm getting up at this time, I need to be at bed at this time, can you make a schedule from then to then for me studying 2D character art, for instance, something like that? And I'll say, right, cool. 7 a.m. do this, 8 a.m. do it, and it'll make a table. Just make a table, and GPT say, here's your schedule for the day. Here's what you need to go do hour by hour. And that in my brain is good, because once I have a schedule like that, I work great. But if I don't have something in front of me that really dictates that, it's harder. And I know for smaller studios, if you can't afford to hire a producer, but you're trying to stay on track, and you're like, look, I've got 6 months, we've got this much money, this many people, can you make a schedule that would line out the next 6 months of how we can reach, from this to alpha? I can see it working there. That in a sense is good. And sure, hold my hands up, that's going to take somebody's job. 100%, I know it's going to. But
I'd
I do,
argue that it
yeah.
just saves you by buying a classic old Filofax.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. I mean, like, I think because
They're
of the
great.
researcher now has an access to the internet, because with the new GPT that just came out today, because I'm always keeping informed just in the sense that, like, I want to know my enemy. I want to know what's going on under the hood. Um, they've now connected it to the internet. So now when you search stuff, it can go live, like, to the thing
Oh,
that exists now and see, well, that's a thing that, like, I was like, what is Digital Artcast? And I went and found my podcast and came back and says, oh, it's a podcast hosted by Gordon Neal, blah, blah,
yeah,
blah. So, like, it didn't have that step in between because it couldn't get current events, but now it
yeah,
can. So it's interesting to see how that's evolving as well. But, like, even the thing where I was like for research, especially, like the game we're doing just now, I'm having to research a lot of stuff as kind of like the art manager at the moment, before we get somebody in that's a wee bit higher above me. But because we're on a budget, where there's only a couple of us. But, like, it's an ancient civilization. Sometimes I don't have a lot of knowledge in. So even just getting a quick synopsis of, can you tell me the bullet points of, like, where I should be looking for this time period, and what would be the things, like, how would people's weapons look, or how would the city look at the time? It would give me just a couple of paragraphs, like
it's
stuff
digital
like,
assistant.
yeah, essentially, like, rather than having to go through a couple of Google things and find maybe, like, something that's factually accurate or something that I think is going to be worthwhile looking at. Yeah, that part of it, like, will help me. Like, so, like, you talked about balance, and we talked obviously for the first 10 minutes about how horrible it is, but, like, now I'm talking about, well, there is some applications I think will help people in the future and will kind of bring that whole, because I also think that the education system is not really hugely set up for neurodivergent people. So I think if they struggle to make schedules and stick to them, if they struggle to plan or make daily tasks, or try to say, like, I have this project, can you break down step by step what I would need to do to complete it? That stuff will help in accessibility wise. But, like, it shouldn't take over your life, but just mold aside it and make it a wee bit better.
Yeah.
So I can see that side of the application being positive.
Yeah, I
Um,
think there's some really good arguments being made there. I think you just raised most of them.
yeah.
But I wouldn't shy away from the digital assistant thing myself, only
Mhm.
because I think what's being asked of people in their day-to-day job roles these days is just so beyond what jobs 10, 20 years ago would have been.
Especially in teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, if and I'm not really using AI a lot right now.
Mhm.
I think it was one point I needed it was a business plan in a way I'd never written before, a requirement
Right.
for something I was looking for. I
Mhm.
was like, right, that is beyond me. And the
Mhm.
one person in the world I would ask was so preoccupied. I was like, right, time to try this out. And it was excellent. It was very, very
Yeah.
helpful. And I know, like, I could have spent a couple hours longer and found all of that stuff
Yep,
myself,
yep, yep.
but I'm in a rush here, and
Yeah.
and then of course, like, the worry is obviously that it's like, start justifying one side of it, then eventually we're coming right down into our own territory. But I
Yeah.
do think there is a difference.
Yes. I think as long as you're making that clear distinction of, I'm not generating AI images, but
Mhm.
I am looking for AI information. I'm looking for the digital assistant. Like, I need to research this particular thing. I need to write a paper. I need some legal advice. I need some medical advice. Like, base level stuff where you maybe don't, wouldn't have to go bother someday, like you said, and you want to just quickly type in something, get a quick response. The stupidest thing, because I was talking about this earlier, but I have a puppy right now. So, like, looking for, like, feeding
That's
guides
the
on how
most
much.
important thing, actually.
Yeah, like just being like, my puppy is this old, he weighs this much. How much should I be feeding him with a raw diet? And they were
Yeah.
like, this many grams, this many times a day, in between walks. But make sure you don't feed all this stuff that I just literally 2 seconds in, and it just gave me a whole thing. And then even the fact, now the scariest thing, Ryan, is that it has a voice module called Cove, and when it talks to you, it talks like a person. It's freaky. It pauses, it
Mm.
says it goes in between. It's language learning, and the way it speaks,
Yeah.
wild.
If I get a
Wild.
Michael Caine one, I'm happy. I'm
Oh,
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but
If you just take the puppy down, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's great. So yeah, I think for me it is just a very smart Google.
Yes.
It's just consolidating 100
Essentially,
Google searches
yes.
for you.
Yeah, pretty
Um,
much all the thing. So okay, so we're talking about, like, down the future. We're talking about the labs. We've talked about things you've done in your job to try and make the excellence excellent.
yeah.
Um, what do you feel is the most important thing for students now to focus on, like, in the present moment? Like, what are you really nailing down as, this is the core skill you need to leave this university with to go and survive in the world of games?
I think the biggest thing more than ever is specializing and really digging deep on something that you care about, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
Because no one can work hard and for a long time on something they don't. And I've seen plenty of people try and lose their mind a little bit, and it doesn't work out. It's an interesting time because actually students are coming towards the end of their honors projects just now. I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
marking them at the minute.
Yeah.
And those, through great conversations, because there's a lot to say here, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about how do you find that specialism? How do you focus? How do you really meet the thing that you're trying to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you got to know what you want, right? And if you are very serious about entering the industry, because some people aren't, some people are like, actually, I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to go into more education. I actually might become an educator, or I might go
Mm-hmm.
into something else.
Some
Like there's
research field or something.
exactly those are all viable places for people to go, and they do go there. But most people are industry focused or industry facing, at least that's where they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, okay, so let's, I've got my 3 Ps. You got to know the people, the productions and the products. And just kind of figure out what that really is and spend time actually really digging down deep, researching what it is you want to do, and then tailor everything towards that. And of course, well, universities and education will give you tools, it'll give you some of the lessons, it'll give you some of the processes, and it'll give you some of the projects. Ultimately, only you can really figure out that specialism for yourself, really dig into it, do the research into it, figure out the procedures and the processes, the techniques, and really tailor something towards you and what you want to do. Honours projects are great because that's obviously a fourth year thing in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And that is watching all of those come to final fruition. I've got 8 honours students, and most of us will have about 8 honours students each,
Mm-hmm.
give or take 1 or 2. And then we'll double mark those, all that stuff. But just looking through some of those portfolios, I'm trying so hard not to mention names here just in case, but it is like, I've got a student, and if you come to the grad show on Friday, which you're all welcome to, of course, a student who's marrying his concept art and his love of film noir with his love of jazz music, and and this sounds mad, right? But it
Yeah.
works. It works really well. He's not just doing great concept art. The whole thing is just, here's the thing, the whole thing is a clever excuse to learn Blender so that he makes better environment art using better environment concept art. He wants to speed his process up. He wants to improve his skills. He wants to get faster, but he also wants to improve his rendering. All the things that you might want to get better at. It's a project to do that, and the excuse to do that was to marry up all of his passions of film noir, his basic knowledge of 3D, his improving and actually increasingly excellent skills in concept design, and then of course his love of jazz music, which I was like, yeah, that's when I get going. I'm like, yeah,
you like jazz?
Yeah, exactly, jazz. Kind of set like that.
Yeah.
And that to me is like, it's you're gonna work for the rest of your life, right? So do something cool now, right? Do something you love and do something you care about. Sure, if you didn't follow a process that somebody said you had to, and you get trolled on Twitter, so what? Shut up, everyone. This kid's just done something really badass, and it is his, and no one else in the world has done that project. There's a lot of cookie cutter type projects out there. Totally fine, nothing wrong with them. But I think personality and passion matters too much, and I think anybody that I've spoken to, they're willing to forgive that missing technique or that one thing you didn't do quite right, because that you can learn, you can get better at that. But having something that's important, something you poured your soul, your creativity into, it's starting to sound like the intro to Lord of the Rings. And but there is that. It's something that is forged from your technical, creative, and I guess your personality, all poured into one thing, and that's why it matters to me. And trying to get there with students is usually half the fun, as well as getting them to realize that you're not just working on just another industry project that has to have the right poly counts, texel densities, and it has to be labeled correctly. I want to see a file naming convention, blah blah blah. I want to see you in it as well. Or else you're going to look like everybody else.
Yeah, and I think like it's so right. And like the one thing I see people getting hired for time and time again is the personality that comes through in their work. Like not everybody can be an Ahmed Aldori, but you can definitely be your own person. You can be a person with a voice, and because most studios, especially like people who are coming up with new IPs, or they're trying to launch something else or do something interesting, or pitch like a new idea, they will look for the people who have the individualistic voices and people who are making stuff that has not been seen before, and combining all, that's, we talked about it earlier, but like, like guys like Tim Schafer and Double Fine, the reason stuff like Psychonauts and Grim Fandango and Monkey's Island back in the day were all super successful, and they were, things that people still remember 30 years later, is because like nobody else was doing stuff like that. Nobody was making games like that or making art like that or working. And the thing I love about Tim Schafer's studio at Double Fine is he doesn't hire stereotypical concept artists. He tries to find people who aren't typical, like Scott Campbell. We've had Scott Campbell on the podcast, and Lee Petty, and Peter McConnell, and all those people worked outside the games and came into games from an external vendor, who either done like fine or traditional art and then came in and done it, or comics and then came in and done concept. Like that individualistic voice is so hard to find that when you grab those people, you just never want to let go of them.
Mhm.
And Scott Campbell's like one of those guys where, like, technically, he's maybe not drawing stuff to an nth degree, like, like Ian's maybe drawing or something like that, but like his stuff has personality. He had a line of comics at one point that got Tim to really like hire him at the time, where he was doing them on post-it notes in the little squares, and it was awkward conversations, and every single little post-it note was an awkward instance of like people meeting and then being really awkward about it. And he had like 100 of them on a gallery wall. But
That's
like
great.
that's what got him hired. So
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, you need that spark, that voice.
yeah. No, I love all that. I think it's too important, and I think there's I guess there can be a worrying trend in education, which is to make universities more and more college-like. That's not to
Mm-hmm.
diss colleges, absolutely vital and important role,
Mm-hmm.
but I have a responsibility to make sure the people that leave our doors are creative, motivated, and good at what they do, as
Mm-hmm.
well as not just reliable, but also that if someone doesn't hire them, do they still love what they do?
Mm-hmm.
That's such an important question to me. Um, and do they have the tools to keep working on that portfolio? I've seen great people who are more than hireable. They don't get the work because some other reason. The competition was high.
Yeah.
They missed the deadline on some other role, or they're just not particularly skilled at certain things. There's a lot of variables in graduates. They're
Yeah.
not all the same. And I really loathe the idea that we produce robots. We can't do that. We
Yeah.
got to have highly motivated, highly creative individuals that can solve problems, as well as have solid foundational skills that leads to good work. And like anybody, they may graduate. There is variation there. They may have
Mm-hmm.
had a tough year, and for some reason or another, they didn't quite produce the project that they wanted to. Let's not assume it's because they're a bad student. It may not have nothing to do with that at all. Maybe because they had caring duties or a job that held them back a bit, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
they need a little bit longer to work on their portfolios and get it up to scratch. As long as they know how to do that, that I can
Mm-hmm.
rely on them, that they can produce a project, they can come up with the ideas, and they can see that through to fruition, then they're always going to get better, as long as they don't leave or stop or
Yeah.
or get unmotivated. There
Yeah.
has to be trajectory always.
Yeah, and that was the same with me with my last year at uni, because between Access and also working for a company, freelance, I ended up getting a 2-1 instead of a first, which always kind of bugged me. But like, it's never skewed my trajectory in the industry. Like my self determination of
Mm,
loving what I've done was why I'm here now working for
yeah.
a studio in Canada. Like, and 2 years ago I was working for a studio in Los Angeles. Like, I went over the world, I've met all these people. Like it's never held me back. Grades have never been a thing that's been my focus. Like,
They
sure,
don't
you've got you
matter.
going, yeah, as long as you're making the work, that's the only thing that matters.
And
Yeah,
my like and I've worked for a couple of universities, but like they would kill me if they hear me say that, and I don't care
yeah,
because I'm like, look, we know this industry's portfolio,
yeah.
and I'm not gonna lie or pretend that it isn't. It is portfolio, portfolio, portfolio. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
also personality. Get
Yeah,
that
yeah,
right
yeah,
as well. Like
yeah.
you've got to make sure you're nice. Be
Yes.
nice at the absolute minimum.
Yep.
But also, it's even better if you can have a wee bit of like rapport with people.
Yes.
And like ace that interview. I always say it's like it's
Yeah.
depending where you start from. I always this really bizarre rule of thirds that I use,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't exist, by the way. This is not an actual rule, but
Right.
some people getting that first job is because they were 2/3 skill and 1/3 personality.
Yeah.
And if you're really cool, it's 2/3 personality and 1/3 skill, you
Skill.
know?
Yeah.
And I think that's who I was. Like I was
Yeah.
good at what I did, but not as good as other people. And I always
Yeah.
got confused when I took roles that were, I know who I went up against. I'm like, why am I here? Not them. And they
Yeah.
were like, because we could talk to you. You were easy to get on with, and
Yeah.
you've got enough of what we're looking for. But we also know that you're, motivated and energetic and want to pitch in and help. And that's the sort of thing that kind of enthuses me. And I just have like one thing that still drives me, because I love education, love it, love it, love it. I'm a little bit obsessed, maybe even a wee bit weird about it.
But good. You already are. Yeah.
So, but it's that if I can plant that seed in other people's head,
Yes.
then I've done my job in this world, and then that's happy. I can go to whatever pile of dirt I belong to eventually,
Yeah.
and just or drink myself into oblivion. But that's my job done.
Yeah.
And again, it's sharing that with students. I always have a dream with students. I talk to them in first year and I'm like, you're students here, but by fourth year, I think we should be colleagues, which is that I can talk to you like I work with you, that we have adult conversations about design and production. And that's usually where we get to with fourth years. And that's great.
I mean, like, honestly, man, you're saying all the right things. And, even, like I was talking about my partner who's a teacher, and even within secondary education, she tries to treat the kids as their people, not that they're teenagers or, tweens or whatever, that they're young kids, like they're functioning adults entering a world where they're trying to make sense of everything, and treating them with the just base level interaction of, you're a human being, I'm a human being, let's talk to each other like we're both human beings. So by the time they get to college, university, if people then, lecturers, especially like yourself, are extending that, then they will go into the world a wee bit more well adjusted, because then they're not getting treated like, their kids. I mean, even the people, sometimes, like I was at a college, level, doing my foundational stuff, and a lot of the kids, they were fairly young, in their early 20s, but like some lecturers would talk down to them like they were, like they knew nothing. And I'm like, well, they're here to learn. They might not know what you know because you've had 20 years in the industry, or you've had 20 years teaching, but they're essentially just fresh molded sponges. Like, we need to really treat them like that, and not assume that they know everything, or like they have all the right answers, and not afraid to ask questions that might sound stupid, but like to us, like, oh, they might, of course that's a relatively easy question to answer, but to them it may be something that they've been that's at the back of their heads for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm terrible at patting myself on the back for getting on with students. I'm pretty sure I don't get on with all of them, and I might not know that. I think I get on with most of them, right? And there's one or two that for whatever reason they don't show up that often. And I tend not to pry, other than when it affects their work. Because there might be something going on. I always start from a position of like, well, are you okay? First of all, that matters more than you'd know. But it's like their personalities are developing too, and there's no way around it. Like, if you're starting university at 18 years old, you're still growing, you're still developing, and there's squishy, awkward things in there. And some of it can actually be, for some students, that can be a painful process of learning how to deal with this giant Irishman. He's like, hey, what are you going to do the rest of your life? And they're like, I want to work in computer games, and I'm like, great, let's go. You
heard a rock star?
Exactly. And I'm like, and the expectations are hard to manage, because you're taking people from like, in 4 years, can I work at Pixar? And I'm like, no, you can't, because they don't hire graduates the way you think they do. They might have some internships.
Unless you live in California.
Yeah, exactly. They've got their source they're going to. I'm like, university should be about, what can you do in 4 years that makes you a better artist or a better designer, fit for the industry you want to go into. We're here to help you answer that. But I hate the language of like, in some of the marketing materials in different places that I've worked for, or even being external examining at, are like, we will give you the tools. And I'm like, maybe we shouldn't say that. I think it's more like, while we do have like, stunning, great staff, right? I love them. Great students. I think take advantage of that more. You're surrounded by people who love the things you love and talk to each other more. Socializing has definitely taken a blow since COVID, and they're less likely to actually engage with each other as a class. But once they get started, it never ends, and it's absolutely fantastic. And they realize what a wonderful smorgasbord of different skills, a variety of specialisms that are available to them. And actually, they kind of lose interest in us as staff. And you're like, great, that's what we want. But my job is, of course, and more importantly, these days, I want to bring more and more industry in and say, come talk to these kids, and we've done some really great stuff this term, which is really nice. You mentioned Jade earlier. I've been speaking to Jade. She's going to come in and do some stuff with the War Dog, and it was just, when you really go looking for it, there are people who want to help, they want to pitch in, and they want to make things better. Education is in a scary, doesn't know what to do with itself state in lots of ways. In COVID and post pandemic, it had taken, it essentially had its arse scalped, right? And it has identity issues. And I'm like, well, I'll let education struggle with that. I can't deal with that. That's not my job. But what I can do is deal with my lot, and what I'm doing with Abertay. And I just get really excited about it, because when I see the work that students do, when I see the love and the interest that we still get from industry, it is, so good. And it's not paradise. It's not perfect. There are improvements we need to make. There will always be improvements that we need to make. But there are contextual issues there that make things difficult and harder than they should be. But I'm not going to cry myself to sleep either. I'm like, nah, get on with it, There's always going to be problems, but what matters to me is who's in my classroom and how they do what they do, and how to get the best out of them. It's just making sure I get through to them, and always making sure that I learn how to do that better. But knowing that there's a cutoff at some point in my life, I'll probably not be able to relate to them. And that's when I know it's time to, take up a job as a janitor somewhere,
or manage other staff members, or go up the pole again, or no, exactly. I mean, like, again, a lot of things you're saying there are ringing bells in my head that are the right things to be doing, and I think if every university had someone like you, Ryan, I think we would be producing, a lot more well-adjusted and better students for the industry. And I think it's always, there's a saying that someone told me years ago, is that we don't need a better world for our kids, we need better kids for our world. And I think that's the idea behind what you're doing now, is that you're making people better for the industry rather than the industry having to adjust for them. And hopefully it'll be the people in 5-10 years time who are, hiring people, and then they'll remember back to when you were their lecturer and how you treated them, and then when they bring staff on, we'll extend that courtesy to them as well. So
I can say with great confidence, just looking at, I could take a handful of students right now, and I know they're going to be leaders one day, just how they handle themselves and how they orchestrate what they do, and more importantly to me, how they treat other students, and how they treat staff, how they treat industry that come in. I look at them and I'm like, it's 10 years time, you're hiring people, and I can't wait. I love that.
Definitely, man. Okay, so I mean, again, conscious of the time, but I think that's a good way to end it. But I think it's one of these things that so you said there's the show's on Friday, right? So we're recording this as of the 14th. So that'll be what's the date? I've got my mouse. What is it?
17th. Friday the 17th.
Right. And then is it open to everyone to come along? And
so from 2 p.m. on it might be 12. Can't get my names right, but either way, just check the Abertay website. But I believe it opens either at 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock.
Right.
And if you're early, find a cafe.
So get a hot drink.
Exactly. So it'll open in the daytime, and it's open for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Both levels. We're actually opening up the full 2 floors of the Centre for Excellence. It's a totally refurbed facility. If you've not been back in a few years, just as of 2020, oddly enough, whenever the pandemic landed, those rooms were finally ready to go. So we've got some really interesting new spaces, virtual production lab, VR, AR lab, and of course, more and interesting, cool plans for the future that I'm really, really, I'd love to share, but I can't just now until I know that the money's in place.
So, which means you have to go and sign up to Abertay University, of course, and go study games at Dundee. That's what you need to go do.
Absolutely. Come by and say hello to me.
Yep, indeed. Get your first year next year. That's what you need to do. Okay, so again, thanks again for coming on, Ryan. It's been an absolute honor talking to you, and I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. I definitely know I have.
That was fun. Thanks very much. Enjoyed it.
Of course, man. To anybody who's made to this point, thank you for listening. I will leave Ryan's details below, of course. if you want to get in touch to either him as a staff member or, of course, to Abertay, you can all find that down below. And check out the course. Again, if you can go to the live event on Friday and over the weekend, that would be great. And thanks to Ryan. Thanks to you guys for listening. And we'll see you guys later in the next episode. Bye, everybody.